Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to The Inner Darkness by Jørn Lier Horst, translated by Anne Bruce. Chapter 59. The engine was ticking loudly after the strain of the fast journey, and the heat made the bonnet vibrate. Wisting jumped out and rushed towards Line and Stille, who were waiting beside the ruins of the barn. "Should you actually be here?" Stille asked. He had obviously been informed of the restructuring of the investigation team. "We're taking time off," Hammer replied. "It's okay with me," Stille said, shrugging. "Kerr's not my chief of police." "Have you spoken to Semmerman?" Wisting inquired. "I've tried to phone him. He's not answering." "The press conference probably hasn't finished yet," Hammer told him. Opening the boot of his car, Stille took out 2 spades and handed one to Hammer. "We should have had a technician with us, or at least someone who could document what we're doing," Wisting pointed out. "Line can do that," Stille suggested. "She's worked for us before." After he had brought a tarpaulin, gloves and white overalls from the car, they followed Line as she led them off into the woods. The long grass was well trodden. Once grazing land, it was all now overgrown, and the forest was slowly making inroads, creeping in at the edges. Wisting brought up the rear. There was a distinct trail, as Line had said. He did not know how many times she had walked back and forth, but it was clear that a path was being formed between the trees. Line led them about 200 meters in to a marshy area. They followed the stream for the last 30 meters, all the way to a backwater. The grave was easier to see in reality than it had been in the photograph. 3 of the branches covering it had been lifted off. The top layer of turf had been dug up in a checkerboard pattern and then replaced. The leftover earth had probably been tossed into the stream. In a few weeks' time, it would barely be possible to see that there had been anything here. "Was this the spot where the others were found?" Hammer asked. Stille shook his head. "No, that was further in, but otherwise very similar. Soft earth with no roots or any other obstacles, a blanket of twigs." Line was busy with the camera as Hammer and Stille pulled on protective suits and gloves. No one spoke as they set to work. The remaining twigs were lifted off and heaped up. Then they started to dig. First the turf squares, then the loose soil. About half a meter down, they caught sight of something, and Stille gave the order to stop. Hammer drew the back of his hand over his forehead to wipe away the perspiration, and Line moved in closer with her camera. "Black plastic bag," Stille noted. He brought out the tarpaulins that Wisting had carried, a thick, white plastic sheet measuring 2 square meters. He unfolded it on the ground beside the hole. Earth rained down from the sides as he lifted the bag and deposited it in the middle of the plastic sheet. Wisting managed to make out that there was more black plastic down in the pit. Glancing across at Line, he gazed straight into the camera lens and wished her 100 miles away. They all knew what they were about to find, and he fervently wished she were not here to see it. The bag was tied with a simple knot and barely a quarter full. "We need a knife," Hammer said. No one had anything they could use to cut the bag open. In the end, Stille used his car key to tear the plastic and his fingers to pull it apart. Hammer swore. Wisting moved closer and saw what was inside. a leg, and a foot. Chapter 60. Right, Adrian Stiller said, straightening up. We need to let the crime scene technicians take over now. You'll have to let Semmelman know too, Hammer said. Line held the camera steady. Paler toes protruded from the opening in the black bag. A grey earthworm wriggled over the tarpaulin. She waited until it was out of the picture and zoomed in until the tear in the plastic filled the whole shot. Stiller drew back and began to speak into his mobile. Lena tilted her head to one side of the camera to see without her view being filtered through the lens. She saw the foot and parts of the leg. The florid skin was covered in pale blisters. However, what struck her was the size of the foot. It was long and broad. It's a man? She said, a hesitant question in her voice. Her father nodded. As Lena moved to find a different angle, a whiff of chlorine made her nostrils flare. He hasn't been here long, Hammer commented. No more than 24 hours. Those are caustic burns, not decomposition. But who is it? Lena asked. Her father opened his mouth to answer but decided against it, as if reluctant to share his thoughts with her or in front of the camera. It can only be one of two people, Hammer insisted. Either Tom Kerr or his accomplice. Lena lowered the camera, struggling to imagine what had happened, how it all fitted together. You mean one of them has killed the other? She asked. Hammer agreed. Well, that's the most likely explanation, in my humble opinion. Stiller's phone conversation had ended. The technicians will be here in an hour, he said. There's probably a head somewhere down there as well. Hands with fingerprints too. We should have an answer as to the identity by this evening. Lena checked her battery capacity. Just over an hour left. And she had another fully charged battery in her car. However, she still felt confused. Had Tom Kerr murdered his accomplice? The person who had helped him to escape, or had his accomplice taken Kerr's life? It's Tom Kerr, Wisting said, gesturing towards the hole in the ground. That's the only plausible explanation. Lena pointed the camera at him. Why do you say that? She asked. Her father refused to elaborate. Lena tried to follow the same line of reasoning. Tom Kerr was the only person who could expose the other one. Kerr had indicated that he was willing to make a confession, to put all his cards on the table in the hope of avoiding a lifetime in custody. It had probably been a ruse, an impression he wanted to give in order to create an opportunity to escape. But the police knew his identity. The likelihood was strong that he would be recaptured sooner or later. Would he then remain silent about the identity of his accomplice, or would he spill the beans so that he would receive a reduced sentence? As long as Tom Kerr was alive, he would pose a risk to his sidekick. She was unable to make all her thoughts stack up, but the most significant aspect at present, as far as she was concerned, was that the body they had found did not belong to Maren Dorkin. Her father walked to the edge of the hole they had dug and hunkered down, resting his elbows on his knees and folding his hands. He stared like that for some time before turning his head up to the other two policemen. How deep is it likely to be? He asked. Why do you ask? Stiller replied. I'm wondering how many bags are lying down there, Wisting answered, getting to his feet, and whether we have one or two bodies. Chapter 61. Wisting's mobile had started to ring while Hammer and Stiller were digging. He had turned off the sound but had continued to feel the steady vibration in his pocket. When he checked the phone, he had 13 missed calls from the press and various numbers he did not have stored. Only one of the people who had tried to get hold of him had left a voicemail. When he played it, he heard that it was from Terje Nordbo of Internal Affairs, leaving a brief message for Wisting to get in touch. Leaning back on the car bonnet, he stole a glance at the trail into the woods and went on to check the online newspapers, starting with VG, where he saw a photo of Maren Dokken in police uniform. She was reported missing without a trace. The story also included a picture of Ida Semmelmann, taken at the press conference, described as leader of the coordinated investigation. He had taken over responsibility for the hunt for Tom Kerr, which after 3 days had proved pretty ineffectual. Semmelmann had stated that they had now traced the grenade used when Tom Kerr escaped to a theft from a military weapons warehouse. In connection with that, the police were also searching for a 32-year-old Talak Gleach. A photo of him had also been released, the same image from police records he had been shown before they raided his house. A bald man with a goatee, easy to recognize if you came across him. Further into the story, he found his own name and picture and the explanation for all those missed calls. He read that he had been removed from the case and was under investigation by Internal Affairs, suspected of official misconduct that had enabled Kerr to escape. It was certainly true that he had not responded to the newspaper's request for a statement. Guro Stemstad, the police prosecutor in charge, declined to answer when asked if he had been suspended from duty. As he put his phone back in his pocket, his thoughts returned to the events when Tom Kerr had cut and run. He had spent a lot of time thinking about it, trying to pinpoint something he should have done, said or thought differently. But all this had led to was self-reproach. Normally robust in his dismissal of negative circular thinking, Wisting was aware that this particular situation was taking its toll on him. The noise of several vehicles made him move from his perch on the car bonnet. A police patrol car rounded the bend, followed by the capacious van used by the Kripo's crime scene technicians. Stiller greeted them and introduced Line. Wisting and Hammer simply nodded to the new arrivals. Equipment was unloaded and carried into the woods, and it was growing dark by the time they were ready to continue digging. A tent had been erected and floodlights set up. The bright lamps cast a harsh light on the hole in the ground, and conversations among the technicians were drowned out by the loud drone of the generator. There was a single flash, followed by a salvo of bright lights. The black plastic bag that had already been lifted out was transferred to a cardboard box, marked and set aside. The next bag was lifted out and photographed. One of the technicians used a carpet knife to cut an incision in it, and an arm was revealed. The technicians continued with their laborious task. Everything they did was documented by photographs. In addition, they had Lena's camera directed straight at them. The third bag, heavier than the others, had a shape that suggested it might be the torso, devoid of arms and legs. One of the technicians slit it open to confirm the suspicion. Someone with a flashlight came walking along the track towards them. Semmelmann, accompanied by 2 other detectives Wisting had not met before. The technicians took a break while Stiller brought them up to speed. Once they were apprised of the situation, Semmelmann turned to face Wisting. "Sorry things worked out as they did," he said, referring to the change of command. "I have full confidence in you. The decision was made over my head." He looked directly at Hammer before turning back to Wisting. "You've both been taken off the case," he reminded them. "You shouldn't really be here." "We're staying until we know what's lying in that grave," Wisting said, gesturing towards the technicians and the hole in the ground. It seemed for a moment that Semmelman was about to make a comment, but he dropped the idea. "What have you got for us so far?" he asked, instead, as he approached the 3 boxes. "One leg, one arm, and a torso," Stiller replied. Semmelman lifted a lid and used a pen to extend the opening in the plastic to see with his own eyes. "They need to go to the lab for examination and analysis," one of the technicians warned him. Semmelman did not appear to catch the mild rebuke. "Can't you scan the fingers, here and now?" he asked. "Then search the fingerprint records and get an immediate answer." "We're taking all the bags out first," the senior technician said. "I see," Semmelman replied with a nod. He replaced the lid of the evidence box and motioned for them to continue. One of the technicians jumped down into the pit again and drew out another bag. The shape suggested that this was the head. "There's only one bag left," he said, hoisting it up. This information caused Wisting's shoulders to relax. Only one body. The plastic bag was photographed from various angles before it was opened. All Wisting saw was hair. Long black hair. The technician opened out the incision in the bag and turned the head to one side so that the face came into view. It was covered in blisters and burns caused by a corrosive liquid. The eyes were closed and the contorted mouth gaped crookedly, but there was no doubt about the identity of the corpse. Tom Kerr was dead. Chapter 62. Wisting turned the car into the driveway and drove slowly up to the house. He sat with his hands on the wheel as the headlights bathed the house facade and entrance in harsh light. The door needed a coat of varnish. He could not remember the last time he had painted it. The thought passed. He turned off the ignition and was enveloped in darkness. This had not happened before. He had never left a job unfinished. There were cases that had to be shelved when they were unable to make any further progress. But he had never stepped aside from an active investigation. The feeling of resignation made him restless. Stepping out into the cool of the evening, he glanced down at Lena's house before letting himself in and switching on the exterior light. The house was dark and silent, and the emptiness tugged at him, reinforcing the deep sense of powerlessness that engulfed him. Reminiscent of hunger, it gnawed at him and wore him down. He headed for the kitchen, where he opened the fridge and took out a half-full carton of potato salad and some cold meat. He ate half of it before pushing his plate aside and taking out his work laptop. The discovery of the body in Ostmarke was all over the news. There was a picture of Tom Kerr with the headline reporting that he had been found dead. Within the text of the story, Idar Semmelman was depicted in the bright light of a camera flash. It was only a few hours since he had taken over responsibility for the investigation, and already he was able to show results. Wisting did not bother to read the story, but agreed with the decision to publicize the fact that Tom Kerr was dead. The idea of him on the loose had generated fear, and there was no reason to withhold the information. He changed the screen image and logged into the case management program. On searching for the Tom Kerr case, he saw that he no longer had access to it. The folder was now emblazoned with a red forbidden sign. When he moved the cursor over it, a dialog box popped up saying that the case files were restricted. Guro Stumstad or Ida Semmelman had administration rights and could be contacted if anyone had a professional reason for access. He searched out the missing person case concerning Maren Dorkin and found that it was similarly marked. His position and professional work meant that he had more extensive user rights than his other colleagues. Normally, he had access to all cases, including those he was not involved in, and cases containing sensitive information that were protected to avoid leaks. Now, he was completely cut off. The computer system had a direct message function in which employees could send short messages to each other outside the email system. It was blinking, indicating that someone had sent him a DM. He opened it and saw that it was from Tim Skag, the Oslo West investigator. The message was brief, just a name, Helen Norum, and a link to a video interview of her. He clicked on the link and accessed an image of a sterile room in which two women were seated on opposite sides of a table. The woman on the right was formally dressed and sat with a case folder in front of her, whereas the woman on the left had a round, slightly quizzical face and shiny black hair. This was Helen Norum, the mother of the third victim, the one who had never been found. The time in the right-hand corner showed that this was a short interview, only 24 minutes long. Wisting pressed play and watched as the investigator ran through a few formalities. She announced the time and place and explained that this was a witness interview in connection with the investigation into the death of Chris Paul's Bach, without letting the woman opposite her know that it was probably Bach who had delivered the hand grenade to whoever had helped Tom Kerr to escape, or that the death was being investigated as a murder. "How did you know Chris Paul's Bach?" the interviewer began. This was a proactive approach, suggesting that the police had already come to the conclusion that they were acquainted, and made it difficult for the interviewee to deny connection between them. However, Helen Norum shook her head. "I don't know who that is," was her response. The plain-clothes policewoman nodded and thumbed through her notepad as if switching to an alternative plan. "What kind of phone do you have?" she asked. "An iPhone?" The policewoman read out the number and Helen Norum confirmed that it was hers. "Is there anyone else who uses your phone?" "No." "Could anyone else have access to it?" "In what way?" "Do you always carry it with you? Or do you sometimes leave it at home? Or do you sometimes leave it at home so that someone else could answer it for you?" "I usually have it with me," Helen Norum said. "I live alone." The policewoman nodded. "On Tuesday, 25 August at 21:53, Chris Post Bach phoned you," she explained. "What did you talk about?" Helen Norum shook her head. "That has to be a mistake," she said. "I have an unlisted number. It must have been a wrong number. I don't know anyone of that name." "Does that sometimes happen? That people phone you by mistake?" "It has happened." The policewoman pushed the sheet of paper across the table. "This conversation lasted almost a minute," she said, her index finger firmly attached to the paper. "That's a long time for a wrong number." Helen Norum studied the paper without saying a word. She seemed bewildered. Her response did not seem faked in any way, but as if she was searching for an explanation or an answer that eluded her. "Do you remember who called you?" the policewoman asked. "No." Helen Norum took out her phone, obviously checking the call log. "It doesn't go as far back as that," she said. The policewoman repeated the date of the call. "Can you remember where you were that evening?" The woman checked her calendar and shook her head vehemently when she could not find an entry. The interview now took a different direction. "Do you have any contact with your ex-husband?" the policewoman inquired. "We've been divorced for 20 years, Helen Norum replied. "You still have the same surname, though?" "It's my maiden name. He took it when we got married in an attempt to start a new life. I wasn't aware of it at the time, but his name had a lot of baggage." "In what way?" "You must have it in your papers, surely?" Helen Norum asked. "He's been inside. Before we met, He was accused of a number of assaults in the place where he came from. I knew nothing about it. Later, he was convicted of the same kind of thing. After we separated, we were only married for 3 years. Did you have contact with him when Taran disappeared? Helen Norham nodded. We had to, she answered. After all, we had her together. Neither of us had any other children. He took it hard, even though Taran refused to have anything to do with him in the last few years. He had been in prison for rape, you see. A tense expression came over her, as if a vague idea had begun to take shape. She raised her head and stared at the ceiling. The policewoman must have understood this. She remained silent to avoid disturbing her train of thought. There was a strange phone call, she finally said. I thought maybe it had something to do with Johannes. When was this? It must have been 3 or 4 weeks ago. It was late one evening, from a withheld number. You know, the kind that doesn't register when it calls you. She put her finger on the sheet of paper with the printout of calls. That must have been him. It was a man. He phoned and said that he had got hold of the goods we wanted. Wisting craned forward, concentrating hard in order to hear more clearly. What goods? The policewoman asked. That's what I asked him too, Helen Norham replied, but I didn't get any explanation. He just repeated that he had arranged for what we wanted. I thought he must have called the wrong number, but he insisted he hadn't. No. He asked whether he had reached the Norhams and read out my number. It was the right one. How did the conversation progress? There was no further conversation. I asked who was calling, and he asked me to wait for a minute. I heard a few noises at the other end, as if he was putting down the phone while he was checking some papers or something. After half a minute he came back and apologized, and then the connection was cut, as if he realized that he had phoned the wrong number and just hung up. Why did you think it had something to do with your ex-husband? I think he mentioned that. He referred to you and your husband. He talked about the goods that you, plural, wanted. The policewoman ploughed on for a while longer to extract as many specifics as possible about what had been said during the phone conversation before she began to summarize the content of the woman's statement. Wisting leaned back. Something jarred her. Something jarred here. He had no reason to doubt what Helen Norham had said, but all the same he could not get it to add up. Only an hour after this phone conversation with Helen Norham, Chris Postbach had been killed and his apartment set on fire. Wisting outlined various scenarios. He would have liked someone to discuss this with, but he had been taken off the case. The information that had emerged from the interview was not meant for his eyes and ears. Anyway, it was too late to phone Tim Skager, as it was well past midnight now. The on-screen interview had ended and the screen turned black before the media player program shut down. There was another file in the folder to which he had been sent a link. The interview with Talek Gleach. It had been conducted only half an hour ago. He must have been arrested sometime this evening. Wisting double-clicked on the icon, click, and the media player reopened automatically. It had taken place in the same interview room. This time, Tim Skager was seated on the right of the table. The man opposite was bald, but had no goatee. There was also a third person in the room, wearing a well-cut grey suit with an open-necked shirt, leafing through a bundle of case documents. A defense lawyer. Talek Gleach gave his name and address. The investigator explained that he was charged with the possession of narcotics and breach of the gun laws. He acquainted Gleach with the information that during the search of his premises, 126 grams of amphetamines and 28 grams of hash, as well as various prescription drugs, had been found, in addition to 3 hand grenades. The drugs are mine, Talek Gleach admitted of his own accord, but I don't know anything about the hand grenades. Someone must have left them at my place. Someone who was visiting me? They were in a cupboard in your bedroom, Skaga pointed out. Your fingerprints are on them. Talak shrugged. I've no idea where they came from, he insisted. They came from a theft at a military weapons store, Skaga said. But you're not being charged with that. That's not what this is all about. Gleach looked across at his defense lawyer. What is this about then? The lawyer asked. I think you've both worked that out for yourselves, Skaga answered. These grenades are packed in sets of 4 in a box. There were 3 left in the box we found in your house. We have information that you gave the 4th grenade to Chris Pausbach. What we want to know is whether he told you what he intended to do with it. The lawyer leafed through the documents and leaned forward. What does Bach himself say about it? He asked. His client answered this before Skaga had a chance to say anything. He's dead, he said tersely. Burned to death in a fire. Tim Skag nodded. Chris Pausbach died 3 weeks ago, he confirmed. When was the last time you spoke to him? Talak hesitated. Wisting's mouth felt parched. He looked around for something to drink, but could not bear to leave the screen. Listen, Skaga went on. I'm trying to put all my cards on the table here. In the days before Bach died, he asked a few folk whether they could get him a hand grenade. We have reason to believe that the grenade was used when Tom Kerr escaped. That means he had probably met the other one. Talak was about to say something, but was interrupted by his lawyer. Wait a minute, he said, raising his hand. How did Bach die? In a fire? It's being investigated as a suspicious death, Skaga replied. Homicide? The lawyer queried. That's our main hypothesis, Skaga verified. The lawyer glanced across at his client. Can we take a break here? He asked. We need to have a discussion. Skaga gave the exact time and announced a suspension of the interview. The screen went black. Wisting paused play. He got to his feet, made for the kitchen worktop and filled a glass with water, draining it in one gulp. He refilled it before going back to collect his laptop and take it through to the living room where he could sit more comfortably. The break was over. When the interview resumed, the lawyer spoke first. My client admits he delivered a hand grenade and a gun to Chris Pausbach, but he has no knowledge of what they were to be used for. Did he say anything about who wanted them? Skaga asked. Talak shook his head. Only that he didn't want them for himself. They were for another guy. Chris was a fixer, someone who could get hold of anything, the kind of person you went to if you needed something. When was this? A week before he died? Skaga encouraged Talak to give more details about how Bach had made contact and to describe the specifics of the handover. I spoke to him after he'd delivered the goods, he said. He was stressed out, really nervous. Why was that? Maybe it was more that he was confused, as if he regretted something he'd started. He was different, anyway, and it wasn't just his beard. He seemed paranoid. Couldn't even sit still. He was looking around all the time, as if he thought someone was following him. Wisting paused the recording again. Something in what Talak had said was tugging at him. He went back and played it one more time. He was different, anyway, and it wasn't just his beard. The statement might suggest that Chris Pausbach had adopted a beard and changed his appearance. It was a fragment of information that corresponded with another one. The man who had pretended to be Theo Derman had sported a beard. Klaus Tank had thought it was some kind of disguise, that he had grown the beard before he visited the lawyer's office with the letter that Tank had been forced to take into the prison. He restarted the playback and waited for Tim Skag to follow this up to ask about the beard, but Skag lacked Wisting's reference points and so had no reason to attach any importance to these words. The interview simply rolled on. When was this? He asked. A couple of days later. I got my money. That was the last time I saw him. Tim Skog leaned forward as if seeking clarity. So you spoke to him again after he had delivered the hand grenade and gun? He asked. Yes. That means a few days before he died? Talak Gleech nodded. And you're certain he had delivered those items? Yes. If not, I wouldn't have got my money. Out of the corner of his eye, Wisting noticed the headlights of a car out in the street. He craned his neck and saw it draw up outside. outside Lena's house. It was nearly 2 a.m. On the screen, Tim Skog and Talak Gleech had reached the conclusion that he must have delivered the hand grenade and gun at least 3 days before Bach died. He understood why Skog was preoccupied with the exact timing. It did not match the phone call to Helen Norum. Wisting had also assumed that the goods Bach had said he had obtained referred to the hand grenade and the gun. He drank from his glass and sat holding it in his hand until Skog announced that it was now 23:17 and declared the interview over. Wisting sat back with a feeling that there was something that did not add up. The information was only a few hours old. He needed some time to take it in and analyze it all. Strictly speaking, it was no longer his role or assignment, but he just could not let go. Chapter 63. Wisting had fallen asleep in the chair and was roused by the phone ringing. It was 7:15 and light was dawning outside. The call was from Hammer. I've come across something interesting, he said. Wisting cleared his throat. I couldn't sleep and I've been sitting here poring over the case documents all night, Hammer went on. Haven't you been denied access? Yes, but this is in Semmelman's database. We can still get into that. The relationship chart. The telecoms data, Hammer replied. Are you at home? Yes. Then I'll come over and show it to you. Wisting took a quick shower and brewed a pot of coffee before Hammer arrived. They sat down together at the kitchen table. Hammer had brought his own laptop, in which he had systematically sorted the raw data gathered from the various telecoms companies. All mobile phone conversation and text messages within the coverage area of Tom Kerr's small holding during the time before it burned down. There were over 1 million results spread over a period of 3 months. The small holding was in an isolated spot, but within the same coverage area as the E6 main motorway and the eastern suburbs of Oslo. He and his accomplice must have communicated somehow, Hammer began. Semmelman and his team have checked out everyone Tom Kerr has been in contact with by phone, without finding anything. Wisting nodded. Meaning that he, or both of them, for that matter, must have used mobiles that were not registered to them while they were talking to each other. A needle in a haystack, Wisting commented. Semmelman's group have also mapped out Tom Kerr's movements in the time period prior to his arrest 5 years ago. They know where he was working, for instance. Sometimes he was away from home for days on end. For example, he was involved in building a new swimming pool complex in Mosjoen. He was up there for a fortnight. I've weeded out all the numbers that were active during the time we know Tom Kerr was not at home and deleted them completely from the data. Wasn't that done before? Hammer picked up a mug and held it up while Wisting poured in some coffee. Well, all I know is that there's no reworked list in the material we received from Semmelman, he said. He raised the mug to his mouth and drank. That still leaves a lot of conversation and messages, but most of the others who live in that vicinity or regularly frequent the area have been eliminated. The remaining material is much easier to deal with. What have you found? Wisting asked. My starting point was the data that the other one also had previous My starting point was the idea that the other one also had previous convictions. I've sorted out all the phones registered to criminals. Zimmerman's group had also looked at that, Wisting objected. That's right, but I thought it would be interesting to take a closer look at them all the same. Borrowed phones often go walkabout in the criminal fraternity. Nodding, Wisting drank from his mug. We're talking about 122 different phones registered to people with criminal records, Hammer went on. 34 of them convicted of sexual assaults. He turned his computer screen to face Wisting. These two are the interesting ones, he said, pointing. It was an overview of the communication between two numbers, conversations and messages listed in chronological order, accompanied by date and time. Stefan Skierberg and Tomrod Jarhen, Wisting read aloud. Who are they? Jailed for sexual offences, Hammer replied. Stefan Skierberg. Stefan Skierberg was convicted of an assault and rape in Toyen Park. Tormod Jarhen for incest and the distribution of child pornography. Wisting could see from his expressions that there was more to come. Hammer jabbed his index finger on the date column on the screen. The point is that they were both in prison at that point in time, he said. Skierberg in Ullersmo and Jarhen in Ila. They got long sentences. Stefan Skierberg died 2 years ago at the age of 62. Jarhen is 29 and was released last year. He has a different mobile number now. They come from different parts of the city, and there's nothing to suggest they even knew each other. Someone must have been paying for the phone use, Wisting queried. They could be automatic direct debits that continue until the subscription is cancelled, Hammer said. Or SIM-only deals topped up with a prepaid card you can buy in any shop. Anyone can do that. Wisting understood. At the time when these SIM-only subscriptions had been entered into there, there had been no need to register personal details, although the rules had been tightened up more recently. If you wanted to continue your pay-as-you-go subscription or take out a new one, you now had to show ID. As long as the subscription was not blocked, in principle, anyone whatsoever could pay the running costs without being traced. This was more than 5 years ago, Hammer continued. All the other user data on the subscriptions have been deleted. We only have what was gathered in at the time to map out the phone use around Tom Kerr's small holding. He scrolled down through the spreadsheet before he went on. The last time the phones were in contact with each other was 8 hours before they tried to abduct Freya Bengston, he said, before everything went wrong for them and Tom Kerr was arrested. You found their contact point, Wisting said. They were really homing in on something now, something that could represent a meaningful breakthrough. At the same time, Wisting's feeling of disquiet had returned. The gnawing sense that there was something here that did not add up. It had accompanied him into his sleep the night before. Now it was back with a vengeance, with increased intensity. There was something seriously wrong here. Hammer pulled his laptop back. We have to draw this to Semmelman's attention, he said. Wisting stood up and crossed to the window. Lena's car was still in front of her house. I think we should keep this to ourselves, he said. What do you mean? Wisting turned to face him. Where do the phones come from? He asked, but then reframed the question. Where are phones kept when the owner is arrested? Wisting could see that Hammer realized what he was getting at. Phones were taken as evidence, especially in the case of sexual offences. Photos and other contents were combed through in a search for documentation of crimes. Thereafter, they were stored into police warehouse for impounded material. If they had been used in connection with the criminal act, they were confiscated and destroyed. Some phones were signed out to family members or sent to prison along with other personal effects, where they were stored until the owner was released. But most phones were left in the hands of the police. Chapter 64. It was light in the room when Line woke. She had forgotten to pull down the roller blind when she went to bed last night. The sky outside was dark grey, the clouds fat with impending rain. Reaching out her hand for her phone on the bedside table, she tugged it out of the charger. It was 7:49. No messages. The online newspaper had little news to impart. The articles had different headings but were uniform in presentation. They retold what had happened when Tom Kerr had made his escape and described it as a police blunder that was currently under investigation. Pictures of her father from the time when he had given a press briefing out at Efton were used to illustrate this. TV2 was the only media outlet that had succeeded in obtaining a comment from Klaus Tonk. The defense lawyer was taciturn, simply confirming that he had been informed that his client had been found dead and that he had no wish to speculate. The article was accompanied by a still from her video taken at the time of Tom Kerr's escape, but the image was not credited either to her or the police. Idar Semmelman had refused further comment following the impromptu press conference he had held the previous evening. The way the police had now organized the investigation, his role was pivotal in the narrative of what had happened. If the case were to be solved, then he would be the hero of the hour. At the same time, she would probably need to angle the story in a negative fashion with reference to the preparations made by the police for the site visit during which Tom Kerr had escaped. Her father would then be portrayed in a bad light. At the moment, what had happened still seemed unreal and difficult to grasp. She felt at a loss because of the uncertainty surrounding Maren Dorcan. Throwing the quilt aside, she sat up, struggling to push away the thoughts of what the policewoman might have experienced and been subjected to. When she rushed into the bathroom and into the shower, she left the water running for a long time and tried to concentrate on her work. It was not all that different from covering an ongoing news story. The difference was simply that it would be a long time before she could present the material she had gathered. She would have to try to persuade Klaus Tonk to speak to her, she thought. He was almost duty-bound to appear. Now that his client was dead, he would be the only one able to speak up on his behalf. The water had begun to cool. She finished up, wrapped a towel around herself and tucked it under her armpits before heading for the kitchen. She sat down and found the number for Tonker's legal office, but the call went straight to an answering machine, and it dawned on her that this was Saturday. The office was closed, and she was given a number to call in case of emergency. On the web page, there was no direct number provided for the firm's lawyers. She could probably obtain Tonk's personal number from her father or from Stiller, but she'd hardly be the only one trying to call him today. Instead, she wrote an email in which she introduced herself and her project, referring to the fact that they had met during the site visit and asking for a meeting without obligation. She did not really expect to hear anything back from him. He would probably be inundated with media inquiries, but an initial approach would make it easier to follow up later. Extricating herself from the wet towel, she returned to her bedroom to get dressed. The phone buzzed to indicate an incoming text message, but she left it until she was dressed and ready. It was from Sophie, wondering if Line could take the girls while she attended to some business. It It didn't really suit her. She had too much on her mind, but she could hardly refuse. Chapter 65. The fridge motor started up. A faint humming noise. Wisting and Hammer were sitting on opposite sides of the kitchen table. Neither spoke. They were both considering the implications of the discovery they had just made.
Black phones, Wisting said. It wouldn't be the first time.
There was a practice with roots in the investigation of drug crimes and the handling of informants. It had become an expression they used. A black phone was a phone that had been seized in evidence in connection with an investigation, but which the narcotics investigators misappropriated from the police store and used to keep in touch with their informants. In this way, they reduced the risk that associates on the drug scene would expose a source. Their conversations could not be traced back to the police, but seemingly the calls were made to other criminals. It was a practice that teetered on the extreme edge of the law. Items used in connection with criminal activity were forfeit, confiscated for the benefit of the public purse. A smuggled vehicle could be sold at a used car auction. A used phone had no significant resale value and was destroyed if the owner did not have the right to have it returned.
We'll need to look at these cases before we can do anything further, Hammer said. Find out if the phones were seized as evidence. See if they were signed out or impounded.
The cases don't belong to our district, though, Wisting said. We don't have access to them. He drew his laptop towards him and searched for them in the data system all the same, managing to locate the case numbers. But if he wanted to read the electronic documents, someone would have to transfer them across. The data system had limited capacity. Each individual investigator had reader access only to cases in their own police district. In addition, these particular cases were more than 5 years old and probably stored in the electronic archives. The IT service would most likely have to be brought into the picture if they wanted to extract these.
Stiller, Hammer suggested. The people in the cold cases group lift cases from the archives all the time.
But these cases are not unsolved, Wisting pointed out.
But he must have countrywide user access, Hammer said. He can get hold of them with a few keystrokes. Phone him.
Wisting picked up his phone and found the number.
Where are you?
He asked when Stiller answered. At home, Stiller replied. Is there news?
To some extent. We need your help with something.
He explained what they had discovered and what they needed. Give me 20 minutes, Stiller said. 18 minutes passed before he called back. You're right, he said. There are a number of points. In interview, Stefan Skeiberg and Tormod Jarhen gave the phone numbers you found. They were both in prison when the phones were used in Ostmarka, but then you already knew that.
Were the phones taken in evidence?
Wisting asked. Yes, they were examined by the Computer Crime Center, but not confiscated. In sexual crimes, phones were routinely checked with the intention of finding compromising material. The fact that the phones were not seized meant that neither of the accused had photos or films related to their crimes on their phones. They are listed as having been returned to their owners, Stiller told him. Wisting shook his head. That could not be.
The SIM cards may have been taken out, Hammer suggested. Used in another phone.
Stiller had not finished. Neither Skeiberg or Jarhen has signed for them, he added. This was not unusual. Once the sentence was pronounced, all the material evidence had to be sorted out before the case could be archived. This usually ended up with personal effects being placed in an envelope, and unless cash was involved, or jewelry or other valuables, this was sent out in the post. The investigator who finalized the evidence procedure was the only person who signed the declaration.
Who signed it out?
Wisting asked. Skiberg's phone was squared up along with a bunch of keys, Stiller replied. It was dealt with by Lena Strife. She's in charge of sexual crimes now. He paused for a moment before continuing. Tormod Jarhen's phone was signed for by Chief Inspector Ida Semmelman. That happened 5 days before it was used. Chapter 66. Silence reigned in the corridors of the police station. The investigation had been moved to Oslo, but the large conference room was still set up to lead the search for Tom Kerr. Semmelman's relationship map hung on the wall, and the ring binders crammed with tip-offs were laid out on the table. Stiller had arrived from Oslo. Hammer closed and locked the door behind him.
We should go to the police chief,
Wisting said. Stiller sat down at the end of the conference table and took out his laptop. You've been taken off the case, he said. I have a meeting with her at 4 p.m. We need to compile the facts so we can put them to her then. Wisting wanted to ask him what kind of meeting he had planned with the chief of police, but left his thoughts unspoken.
Where do we start?
Hammer began. We have to find some point of intersection, Stiller replied. A starting point. Tom Kerr was convicted 3 times, but early in the noughties, Klaus Tonk got him off on a rape charge. It was due to a technical error. Bad police work. Noughties. 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 The noughties is the informal term for the decade from 2000 to 2009, also known as the 2000s or the aughts. Noughties. A starting point. Tom Kerr was convicted 3 times, but early in the noughties, Klaus Tonk got him off on a rape charge. It was due to a technical error. Bad police work. He called up the case on his laptop screen. The documents were listed by number, description and name of the detective who had written the report. One name recurred constantly. Ida Semmelman. Hammer grabbed a marker pen he saw lying on the table. Flipping off the red cap, he got to his feet and strode up to the relationship chart on the wall.
It's incomplete,
he declared. It was intended as an overview of all the people who in some way or another were linked to Tom Kerr. People with whom he had had various dealings, close and distant connections. However, there were no police officers listed. The marker pen squeaked as Hammer drew a new ring around Tom Kerr's inner circle. He hesitated to write anything and ended by leaving the ring empty. None of them had voiced aloud the idea that one of their own could be the other one.
Helen Norum has a withheld phone number,
Wisting said in support of the unspoken theory.
She said so at her interview. Someone called her the night Chris Pausback died. Someone who had access to her number.
Another detail surfaced.
The beard, he said. I must phone Tim Skager.
Without any further explanation, he took out his phone and called the Oslo West investigator. Skager launched into a lengthy apology about how the investigation was now organized.
It's just crap, all of it, he said. And of all people, they've appointed Semmelman to lead it. You managed to get hold of Talek Gleach?
Wisting commented. Yes, I sent you a link to the video of the interviews with him and Helen Norum, Skager said. Not much came of them, right enough, but I was left with the distinct impression that Chris Post Buck was involved in something that had somehow got out of control.
I've watched the interview, Wisting said. He mentioned something about a beard. Did Buck have a beard?
Not normally, and not when he died. He'd shaved it off by then, I suppose. But we've been monitoring his movements and have some video footage of him with a beard. Wisting asked him for further details. It had to do with his card use, Skaga explained. We've a list of all the places where he used his bank card. Weisting understood. This was routine procedure in every major investigation. We've also gathered in video footage from the customer cash points with CCTV, Skaga went on. Virtually all of them, in fact.
Can you send that to me?
Wisting asked. You're no longer on the case, though, are you?
I've a rookie officer who's gone missing, Wisting answered. I'm not letting this go until she's found.
I'll put it in a folder and send you a link, Skaga said. But there's nothing there. He's on his own on every occasion.
Thanks, anyway,
Wisting replied. Skaga grunted something incomprehensible. Semmerman should never have been put in charge, he repeated. They moved him just to get rid of him. He should never have been given that kind of responsibility.
Who wanted to get rid of him?
The top brass, Skaga replied. He'd worked for years in sexual crimes, you see. Worked his way up to the post of Chief Inspector and head of section. But that became a problem after a while.
What do you mean?
Only rumor, but people thought he was a pervert himself. It was said that he took too long going through the material seized on evidence. He took it upon himself to analyze the worst of the sexual abuse films. It was also said that he liked to get sexual assault victims to describe what they had been subjected to, down to the smallest detail. There were a few complaints, but they never managed to catch him out in anything. When Tom Kerr was arrested, they moved him sideways and appointed him to lead a group tasked with trying to find the accomplice. 5 years he's been doing that. Maybe he'll succeed now, but I have my doubts. I've said it before and will say it again. He should never have been given that job. Chapter 67. It had started raining again. Wisting walked to the window, opened the blinds a crack and peered out. A man with a red umbrella was hurrying across the street. The computer gave a signal. Tim Skaga had sent him Chris Post Buck's bank account printout and the picture from the cash point cameras. Stiller and Hammer stood on either side of him as he opened each image. They saw Buck in front of the cash machine in various shops, wearing a number of outfits. His beard grew longer and fuller in each picture and eventually covered the whole lower part of his face. In one of the last images, he also had a sticking plaster on his right cheek and under his left eye. The date stamp indicated that this was taken on 20 August at 1437. Where was that? Stella asked. Wisting checked the file name.
Delhi de Luca in Akersgata,
he read off.
Oslo city centre, just a stone's throw from Klaus Tank's office.
He's the one who went there, without a doubt, Stella said. He's Theo Derman.
He's nothing but a message boy, Hammer broke in. A pawn who was used. Someone who could get hold of guns and run errands.
Someone he had to get rid of. More to the point, Stella added. A forgotten frying pan on the hot plate. All policemen have been to fires like that. It's one of the first things the technicians look for. They rarely do any further investigation after that. Standing up again, Wisting returned to the window and opened it slightly. Shh. The air that wafted in was fresh, but damp.
We need more,
he said.
We can't wait, Hammer insisted. If he has Marendokken, Then every hour counts. Every minute, in fact.
Stiller had found Semmelman's address. He's divorced and lives alone. No children.
He must have a place he uses, Hammer said. Somewhere that's not his own, but that he has free access to. Much the same as knowing that the welding workshop where we found the van was lying empty.
Can we put surveillance on him? Wisting asked. Stiller shook his head. I can't send out a team without telling them what they're doing.
Where is he now?
Hammer inquired. Probably at work, Stiller replied. In his office. I can find out. Come up with an excuse to phone him. You could ask if he's investigated the Social Security office in Sagene, Wisting suggested. The call to Klaus Tunk came from a job seeker phone in there. He should check it out. Check whether anyone remembers a man with a beard on 20 August.
Hammer grew impatient. We could follow him, he said. Use our own cars. No more than 40 hours or so have gone by since Marin disappeared. He held the others for at least 3 days. He might well lead us to her.
He's an experienced investigator, Wisting reminded him.
He'd recognize our cars and easily cotton on to being followed.
I can get a tracker placed if we find his car, Stiller said.
That way we can keep our distance.
Hammer, with his jacket in his hand, glanced at Wisting.
Are you with me?
He asked. There was something over-hasty about the suggestion, but at the same time it contained a simple logic.
Yes, I'm with you,
Wisting agreed. He was last to drive out of the backyard at the police station and had lost sight of Hammer even before he reached the motorway. Squalls of rain lashed the windscreen, reducing visibility. After an hour at the wheel, Stiller phoned. He connected all 3 vehicles in the conference call. I've spoken to him. He was at the office. We've made a deal. I'm going to go in. He's found a link between Chris Postbach and Johannes Norum. They served time in prison in Oslo together. The phone call to his ex-wife on the night back was killed suggests that he might be involved.
That's part of the pretense,
Hammer said.
The call to Helen Norum was a smokescreen, a diversion, in case an investigation was instigated.
I'm going to see him for a run-through, Stiller said. They're working on the theory that it was some kind of revenge attack. Wisting turned off the road into a petrol station.
That gives us some time then, he said, addressing himself to Hammer. Do you have an address for Tormod Jarhen? We need to talk to him about the phone that was confiscated.
It's in Stovner, Hammer answered. I'll send you the address and his new phone number. Wisting drew up in front of the petrol pumps, waited until the conference call had ended, and stepped out to fill his tank. Then he drove on, turned off on the Ring Road, and followed the directions to the blocks of flats that surrounded Stovner town centre. The rain was beating on the car roof. He stayed in his car in the huge car park, found Hammer's message, and called the number he had been given. Not really expecting an answer, he was taken aback when Tormod Jarhen answered at once and introduced himself by his full name. Wisting gave his name and explained that he was from the police.
I'm doing some investigation into suspected misappropriation of goods from the police evidence warehouse, he began. There's something I'd like to speak to you about.
What kind of investigation? Jarhen asked. It's a long time since I had anything to do with the police. The skepticism in his voice was obvious.
I'm in Stovner at the moment, Wisting continued. Could we meet?
I'm not at home, Jarhen replied hurriedly. Wisting looked up at the blocks of flats in front of him. He had no idea exactly where Jarhen lived, but imagined that he might well be at home.
To be more specific, it's suspected that a police officer may have stolen items seized in evidence," he said. "There are some personal effects we can't account for. I'd hope you could help me to clear up a few details."
"Can't we do it over the phone?" Jarhen asked. Normally, Wisting would have made more of an effort to have the opportunity to speak to the man face to face, but he decided against it this time.
"You were arrested 6.5 years ago," he began. "Among the belongings the police confiscated from you were your computer equipment and your mobile phone."
The man at the other end remained silent.
"Can you remember what kind of phone you had then?"
"A Sony Xperia. I have one now as well, but the latest model."
"Do you recall the phone number?"
Tormod Jarhen hesitated. He began to recite a number, but then realized that he did not remember it after all.
"Do you recollect what kind of subscription it was?"
"Pay as you go, or top-up card." Wisting nodded.
"Do you know where that phone is now?"
"No idea." Wisting appreciated that he had framed the question badly.
"Did you get it back?"
"Yes, but I haven't a clue what became of it. It became so outdated while I was behind bars. I think I just threw it away and bought a new one."
"So you definitely got it back?"
"It was among my things when I was released. I think it had been in the prison storeroom the whole time, along with the other personal belongings I didn't need or wasn't allowed to have with me in my cell."
"So you definitely received it when you were released?"
"That, my wallet, my keys, even though I no longer had that apartment. There were a few other things too, memory sticks and CDs. There was nothing missing when I got out. I don't think I can help you." However, Wisting was not ready to end the conversation.
"So while you served time, your possessions were transferred from the police to the prison?"
"I assume so. At least, they were there when I checked out."
"Do you know when that happened?"
"Not a Scooby. You'd have to ask at the prison." The answers he received from Tormod Jarhen were not as unambiguous as he had hoped, but they prompted an unexpected reaction.
"You were in Ila?"
Wisting asked him. "At the beginning I was. For the final year I was banged up in Berg, in Vestfold district. That was where I was given my things when I got out, but they had probably just been transferred when I was moved."
"Who was your contact warden at Ila?"
Wisting probed further. "I had several," Jarhen answered. "Some of them left or were replaced." He mentioned a couple of names. "And then there was somebody called Molander," he added. Wisting's eyebrows shot up as he pictured the arrogant prison guard in a crumpled uniform shirt who had stood guard while they ransacked Tom Kerr's cell.
"Frederick Molander?"
he asked. "Yes, but he applied to work in the detention center and started work in there." Wisting tilted his head and peered out of the side window. Something began to dawn on him, just a narrow, modest crack of light at first, but it opened out to reveal a possibility, the possibility of an alternative explanation. It could not be more difficult for a prison employee to misappropriate a phone than it was for a detective. Quite the opposite. He was not familiar with the system or routines, but access would, if anything, be easier and the risk less. He rounded off the conversation. The wipers swept over the windscreen and cleared away the rain. He sat for a few minutes longer before moving off and calling Hammer.
"Stiller's in the police station now," Hammer told him. "I'm sitting outside waiting. It could take quite a while. Have you spoken to Jarhen?"
Wisting recounted the conversation with Tormod Jarhen, but refrained from sharing the thoughts he was left with about what had emerged.
"I'm going to pay a visit to Ila," he concluded. "I want to know when the phone arrived there."
They knew when the police had signed for the phone, that they had been 3 weeks before Tom Kerr and his accomplice had abducted the first victim, but they did not know when the phone had been handed into the prison. The time was the crux of the matter, pointing to where their suspicions might lead.